And the time considerations, this is another thing that you mentioned that we didn't cover, but basically you guys realized you had like an hour to get the job done, and the Somali resistance couldn't organize quickly enough. If you were in and out in less than an hour, they wouldn't be able to really put up a decent fight.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we would rehearse this so many times that no matter how we hit the ground, we could do it in under an hour. We could, even if like Osama or Osmanado did, squirted out, we could track him down, get him on a bird, get out, collapse the whole thing. No matter what, we could do that in under an hour. And so it was really a well-oiled machine. Now, the other important part of that clock, though, is with my ringside seat to watching Osmanado getting taken down, is you could see the Somalis assembling. And, it just takes them a while because they don't have communications, and they're just trying to get everybody in the neighborhood together. And so they would throw tires out in the street. The tires would burn. Everybody would see the smoke, and then they would kind of react like militiamen or like Minutemen and come to that, and then try to get their act together and organize and get in the fight. But that was going to take them more than an hour to do that. And we could see that. We could see the resistance increasing as the clock was ticking on Osmanado. And that mission took about 50 minutes. And then about 55 minutes as the last guys were getting on the birds, the snipers were starting to engage threats. They were starting to take some ground fire, and you could see people coming. I mean, literally crowds coming down the street and people maneuvering to get in. So we knew that our hour template, our hour clock on the mission was valid.
In the book, I think at this point there's been like 4 or 5 missions on the ground. Is that about the right number?
Yeah, six total up to before October 3rd. There've been 6 missions. That's right.
Fast forward, as the briefing went on, standing off to the side, consulting with Colonel Boykin, Major General Garrison weighed the risk. He too realized the dangers, but shared our faith in the plan, and this was too lucrative a target to pass up. While this new Somali intelligence source seemed somewhat tentative, the information he provided added up. The decision was made to launch. As the intelligence rep concluded his brief and made his last comments, the leaders began to move toward the door. I noted the heavy Somali security element again moved over to Colonel Boykin to ask if we would go in by getting rockets on the AH-6s today. He looked me deliberately and answered, "Yes, Jim, you're getting the rockets." So there you go.
Yeah, so that's what we alluded to before, right?
Get these rockets on
the level of security at the target, right?
The hangar soon echoed with orders to get it on, and the chocks moved out quickly through the mid-afternoon heat. And you guys had done a lot of spin-ups and scratches, you call them here. And this happens again. You guys go out, you get on the aircraft, then you're back off the aircraft, back on the aircraft. Finally, it looks like you're going. Hurrying back to Super 6-4, I climbed into the back and squeezed into place, packed in among the other Rangers, and waited. As I got settled in, I looked out the right side of the aircraft and noticed Bill Garrison moving among the birds. He had walked out of the TOC with the assault force and was now shaking hands and giving encouragement to operators, Rangers, and pilots as they saddled up in the aircraft. It struck me that he had never done this before. The assault force was soon reloaded and set aboard the aircraft.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. We did many of the missions we did, or most of the missions we did, were within the Haber-Getter territory. And we knew kind of the conditions out there. But again, we had a lot of confidence. And 6 missions, we felt like we'd validated the things that we were confident in. But this one, it's a great point that we had actually spun up and stood down like 3 times in 2 days before this, over a 24-hour, about less than a 48-hour period. Gotten our stuff on, gone out to the aircraft, nope, scratch. So we were used to that. But on this one, I will say, it had a different feel, and we could see the level of security. I mean, we did not usually see that many Somali fighters on the ground, of the actual militia guys that were there pulling security, and the place that it was located next to, a lot of activity that was going on, very close in the Bakara market, lots and lots of Somali fighters there. So we knew it was high threat. I mean, we could feel that it was high threat, and obviously he knew it too, and because that was just one of those kind of ravens that fly into the picture. He came out and shook all our hands goodbye.
Getting into it. Fast forward, as the first wave of helicopters cleared the area, the 4 Ranger Blackhawks continued to come in slowly toward the target, trying to remain steady and allow the billowing dust to clear. Super 6-4 seemed to inch forward, still high above the rooftops as the pilots struggled to keep stability. Finally, we realized our Blackhawks were just renewing the milky churning storm. It was obvious they could not get any lower. When the order was shouted for ropes out, there was another delay as one of the long, thick green ropes got hung up on a telephone wire. As the pilots jockeyed the bird forward to untangle it, Crew Chief Bill Cleveland leaned forward, out over his minigun, then finally called the rope clear and on the ground. We still seemed too high, far above the rooftops as the aircraft began to hover in the cloud. Over the engine noise, we suddenly heard go, go, go. But the Rangers in the doorways hesitated for a brief second as we seemed far too high. Then the orchestrated surge began. As I pressed forward in the sequence, I watched the Rangers slide down, instantly disappearing into the milky cloud of brown. As the aircraft rotors thundered in my ears, I could see the rope swaying in front of me just far enough out that I had to commit my body weight to reach it. So, had you guys been in brownout before on these other missions?
We had, but not this intense.
It was just gnarly.
For this one, for whatever reason, it was just the most amount of dust we'd seen, and we were trying to do things at night. So I'd say only one or two of the missions before had been in the daytime, and just for whatever reason, the conditions were much better on those, so we didn't have that much brownout. This one, like I talk about, it was classic assault. Though we came out of the west, out of the setting sun. And then started inching in, and just an unbelievable altitude that we were at. I mean, again, I relate it in the book, but we just could not believe they were going to put us out at that altitude.
So it's like 90 feet.
Yeah, it had to be.
Fast rope?
It had to be the full length of the fast rope because there was multi-story buildings, and we were far above those. And again, after a point, you couldn't see the ground, so you knew you were still way up there, and we were waiting for them to go down and lower and settle in, and they never did. They're like, go, and we would just, a little bit of disbelief, but then Rangers are Rangers, and they just went, and it was on.
I finally crashed into the street. I took a few disoriented steps, slamming into a wall before getting my bearings. Amid the swirling dust and thunder of the helicopter above me, I heard another sound, sustained gunfire. As the Rangers around me on the south corners of the target buildings began to sort themselves out, it was obvious that those to the north were already in contact with the enemy. Fast forward, all around me, the Rangers at R1 on the southeast Ranger blocking position were set, facing outward amid the tight alleys and debris of the narrow street. Captain Steele and his radio operator, along with the Air Force CCT sergeant, clustered by a telephone pole a few feet behind me. So it's on when you guys get on the ground.
Yeah, and that was unique too, because the element of surprise, the fact that we could go anywhere in the city, that gave us that element of surprise, and so we never really had to assault into a fight. It would develop afterwards as Somalis kind of figured out where we were at and start probing, but probes are a lot different than attacks. And because of that security element that was on the ground, fortunately they all didn't stand and fight, but enough of them did that the fight was on, at least on the north side, pretty much the minute we hit the ground. Another kind of interesting point I want to make here is about the template. So it's kind of hard to understand or visualize, but I never really knew where I was in the city, and I didn't have to. We had this template that we rehearsed over and over again, so I always went into the same place. I was always going to be at the southeast corner. The same teams went to the same locations around the target building, so all I had to do was know that's the target building right there, and I was immediately oriented. I knew I was in the southeast side. I knew who was on the northeast, northwest, southwest. I knew Delta was inside the house, so that's the orientation. But I never really knew where I was in the city. If you'd asked me to pull out my map and show you what street I was on, I wouldn't have been able to do that. All I knew was what the target house was, and if I was in the right spot, I was locked into that template, and that was my orientation.